What happens when one of Hollywood's most polished, media-savvy stars walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a thoughtful conversation, but instead finds herself in the middle of a tense, unscripted clash that slowly turns into one of the most talked-about on-air moments of the year? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already clapping as Reese Witherspoon walks out, smiling, waving, completely composed. That signature calm energy she always brings. She hugs a couple of the hosts, exchanges a quick laugh, and takes her seat. Everything feels normal, light, exactly what you'd expect from a daytime show. The hosts are smiling too, but there's already a slight edge in the air. Not obvious yet, just subtle. One of the co-hosts leans forward first, smiling. "Reese, it's so good to have you here. You've been everywhere lately, producing, acting, running your company. How do you even keep up with all of it?" Reese laughs lightly, brushing her hair back. "I don't know if I do, honestly. I think I just drink a lot of coffee and hope for the best." Audience chuckles. Another host jumps in. "That's relatable at least." Then Whoopi Goldberg leans slightly forward, resting her hands on the table, watching Reese closely. Her tone is calm, but more direct. "You've built a brand around empowering women, which is great, but some people feel like it's become more of a business strategy than a genuine message. What do you say to that?" There's a very small shift. It's quick but noticeable. Reese's smile stays, but it tightens just a little. She nods slowly. "I think anytime you try to do something meaningful and also turn it into a sustainable business, people are going to question your intentions. But for me, it's always been about creating opportunities, telling stories that weren't being told before." Whoopi doesn't immediately respond. She pauses, tilts her head slightly. "But do you think sometimes it starts sounding rehearsed? Like the same message packaged over and over again?" The audience makes a soft, "Oh," not loud, but enough to feel it. One of the other hosts quickly jumps in, trying to keep things light. "I mean, consistency isn't a bad thing, right?" Reese lets out a small breath, still composed. "I don't think believing in something strongly and repeating it makes it less real. If anything, it means you're committed." Whoopi nods, but she doesn't back off. "Or it means it sells." Another small reaction from the audience, a few claps, a few murmurs. The energy is starting to shift. Reese turns slightly toward Whoopi now, more direct. "Well, yeah, if it sells, it means people are connecting with it. That's not a bad thing." There's a beat. You can feel the tension building, but it's still controlled. A co-host tries to redirect again. "Let's talk about your latest project." But Whoopi cuts in gently, not aggressive, but firm. "No, because I think this is important. We see a lot of celebrities stepping into these spaces, activism, empowerment, and sometimes it feels like it's more about image than impact." Now the room quiets more. Even the audience stops reacting for a second. Reese shifts in her seat. Her tone changes, still calm, but more grounded, less polished. "I hear that concern. I really do. But I think it's unfair to assume that just because something is successful, it's not sincere." Whoopi leans back slightly, crossing her arms. "I'm not saying it's not sincere. I'm asking if it's always as deep as it sounds." There's a pause. Reese looks directly at her now. "I think depth looks different depending on who's experiencing it. For some people, seeing a woman lead a story or run a company is impactful. That matters." A few audience members clap louder this time. Another host nods quickly. "That's true. Representation matters." Whoopi raises a hand slightly, not dismissing, but holding her ground. "Sure. But representation without real change can feel hollow. That's all I'm saying." The tone is still controlled, but now it's clearly a debate. Reese leans forward just a bit. "And I would agree with you, if that's what was happening. But I don't think it is." The audience reacts again, this time more split. Some claps, some murmurs. There's a slight overlap as another host tries to jump in. "I think what Reese is saying is," but Reese continues, not louder, just more firm. "We've actually put real resources into these projects. Real opportunities for women behind the scenes, not just in front of the camera. That's not surface level." Whoopi nods slowly, but her expression doesn't soften. "And that's good. I'm just asking, how much of that is visible, and how much of it is part of the story being told about you?" Now there's a sharper edge to the question. Reese pauses for a second. It's the first real pause where she's choosing her words carefully. She smiles again, but this time it's more controlled. "I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm perceived in that way. I focus on the work." A co-host claps lightly. "That's fair." But Whoopi doesn't let it go. You don't think perception matters? Especially when your entire platform is built on messaging. The audience goes quiet again. Reese exhales slightly, then nods. Of course it matters. But I don't think it's productive to reduce everything to perception. At some point, you have to look at what's actually being done. Now the energy is fully different from the start. The smiles are still there, but they're thinner. The conversation isn't casual anymore. Another host tries again to soften things. I think both of you are kind of saying similar things in different ways. Whoopi turns slightly toward her. No, we're not. I'm asking a question that I think people at home are asking. A few audience members clap louder at that. Reese nods slowly. And I'm answering it honestly. There's a beat. A longer one this time. Then Reese adds, a little more direct than before. But I do think there's a tendency to question women's intentions more than men's when they succeed in these spaces. That lands. The audience reacts, louder this time. Some clapping, some yes voices. Whoopi raises her eyebrows slightly. You think that's what this is? Reese holds her gaze. I think it's part of it. Now the tension is unmistakable. It's no longer just a discussion. It's turning into a real on-air clash, the kind where you can feel both sides digging in, even if they're still being polite about it. One of the co-hosts looks between them, smiling nervously. Okay, we're getting into it now. The audience laughs, but it's a tense laugh. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone still calm but firmer. No one's questioning your success. I'm questioning the messaging around it. Reese responds almost immediately now. And I'm saying the messaging exists because the work exists. Another small wave of audience reaction. The host next to them tries to jump in again. All right, let's. But both Reese and Whoopi speak at the same time, overlapping slightly. Reese, you can't separate the two. Whoopi, but you can question it. They both stop for a second, a brief moment of awkward overlap. The audience reacts, a mix of laughter and anticipation. Reese smiles again, but now there's a clear edge. Go ahead. Whoopi shakes her head slightly. No, you go. There's a pause. And for the first time, it feels like the conversation could go in a much sharper direction, or pull back. But the energy in the room says it's not pulling back. It's just getting started. There's a brief silence after that overlap, the kind that feels longer than it actually is. You can see a couple of the hosts shifting in their seats, glancing at each other, trying to decide whether to step in or let it play out. Reese lets out a small breath and gives a polite nod. No, please. I want to hear what you were going to say. Whoopi leans back slightly, then forward again, like she's deciding how direct to be. All right. What I'm saying is, when you build a platform around empowerment, people are going to look closely at how that's being delivered. And sometimes it can feel like it's being filtered through a very specific lens. Reese tilts her head slightly. What kind of lens? Whoopi doesn't hesitate. A very polished, very curated, very controlled version of empowerment. And not everyone relates to that. The audience reacts again, a mix this time. Some claps, some low murmurs. One of the co-hosts quickly jumps in, smiling but clearly trying to ease the tension. But isn't that true for everyone in the public eye? Everything is curated to some degree. Whoopi nods without looking away from Reese. Sure, but when your brand is built on authenticity, people expect less polish and more reality. Reese's expression shifts again, still calm, but now there's a firmness in her posture. She straightens slightly. I don't think being thoughtful about how you present your work makes it less real. Whoopi replies almost immediately. It can if it starts to feel disconnected from everyday experiences. That lands heavier. Reese pauses, then leans forward just a little more. I think it's important to remember that everyone's experience is different. Just because something doesn't reflect one person's reality doesn't mean it's not valid. A few audience members clap, louder this time. Another host nods quickly. That's a good point. But Whoopi shakes her head slightly. I'm not saying it's not valid. I'm saying it's not the full picture. And when you're in a position like yours, people expect you to show more than just the polished side. Now there's a clear shift. This isn't just about messaging anymore. It's becoming personal, or at least it feels that way. Reese smiles again, but it's tighter now. I think we do show more than that. Maybe not in the way you expect, but it's there. Whoopi raises an eyebrow slightly. Is it? Because from the outside, it can look like a very controlled narrative. The audience reacts again, louder murmurs, a few scattered claps. One of the co-hosts tries again to redirect. Let's not forget, Reese is also. Reese gently lifts a hand, not cutting her off harshly, but clearly wanting to respond. No, it's okay. I want to address this. That gets another reaction from the audience, a kind of okay, here we go energy. Reese turns fully toward Whoopi now. I understand the idea of questioning public figures. I really do. But I think there's also a line where it starts to assume that everything someone does is calculated or performative. Whoopi leans forward slightly. And you don't think any of it is? Reese answers without hesitation this time. Of course some of it is. We're on television. Everyone here knows that. A few audience members laugh and clap at that. Even one of the hosts smiles. Fair enough. But Reese continues, her tone more grounded now. But that doesn't cancel out the intention behind it. You can be strategic and sincere at the same time. Whoopi nods slowly, but she's not backing down. I agree with that. But the question is, which one comes first? That question hits harder than the others. There's a pause. Reese's smile fades slightly. Not completely, but enough to show she's taking this more seriously now. For me, the intention comes first. Always. Whoopi tilts her head. But the audience doesn't always see that. Reese responds quickly. Then maybe we need to trust the audience a little more. That gets a stronger reaction, clapping, a few louder voices from the crowd. One of the co-hosts nods enthusiastically. I like that. But Whoopi shakes her head again, this time with a small smile that doesn't quite soften the tension. Or maybe the audience is already seeing exactly what they think they're seeing. Now the room shifts again. That line lands differently. It feels sharper. Reese leans back slightly, then forward again, clearly engaged now. And what do you think they're seeing? Whoopi answers calmly. A version of empowerment that's easy to sell. There's a noticeable reaction from the audience, louder this time. Some clapping, some oh sounds. Another host quickly jumps in, half laughing. Okay, we're really getting into this now. But Reese doesn't laugh. She stays focused. I don't think making something accessible makes it less meaningful. Whoopi responds just as quickly. It can if it simplifies things too much. Reese shakes her head slightly. Or it can open the door for more people to be part of the conversation. That gets applause. One of the co-hosts claps along. That's true. But Whoopi leans in again, her voice still calm but more pointed. But are they part of the conversation, or are they just consuming it? There's a pause. Reese's expression tightens. Again, this is the first moment where it feels like she's genuinely pushed. She takes a breath. I think that's a little dismissive of the audience. Whoopi replies immediately. I think it's realistic. The audience reacts again, split, louder, more engaged. Now multiple hosts try to step in at once. Okay, I think both sides. Their voices overlap slightly, but neither Reese nor Whoopi fully disengage. Reese speaks again, more direct now. I don't think it's fair to assume that people aren't capable of engaging deeply just because something is presented in a certain way. Whoopi nods once. And I don't think it's fair to assume that presentation doesn't shape how deeply people engage. That exchange lands hard. The audience claps, louder, more sustained this time. One of the hosts laughs nervously. All right, we might need a referee here. Another adds, smiling, or a commercial break. That gets a bit of laughter, but the tension doesn't fully break. Reese glances briefly at the other hosts, then back to Whoopi. I think we actually agree on more than it sounds like. Whoopi shrugs slightly. Maybe, but we're coming at it from different angles. Reese nods. And that's okay. There's a small pause, the first moment that feels like it could cool things down. But then Whoopi adds, almost casually, I just don't like when things are presented as deeper than they are. And that pulls it right back. The audience reacts again, a louder, oh this time. Reese's smile returns, but it's clearly more controlled now. And I don't like when people assume they know the depth of something without being part of it. That line lands. The audience claps loudly, the loudest yet. One of the co-hosts leans back, eyes wide slightly. Okay. Another host looks toward the camera briefly, like she knows this moment is going to clip everywhere. Whoopi gives a small nod, acknowledging the point, but not conceding. Fair enough. There's a brief pause again, but this time it doesn't feel like a slowdown. It feels like both sides have now fully stepped into the conversation, with neither one willing to step back. The energy in the room has completely shifted from the light, friendly start. Now it's sharp, focused, and unpredictable. And it's clear to everyone watching. This isn't winding down anytime soon. There's a moment where nobody speaks. Not the hosts, not the audience, not even Reese or Whoopi. It's that rare kind of silence on live TV where you can actually feel people deciding what happens next. One of the co-hosts finally exhales and leans forward with a half smile. Okay, this is one of those conversations where I feel like everyone at home just sat up a little straighter. A few people in the audience laugh, but it's still tense. Another host nods, trying to ease things. And that's not a bad thing. These are important discussions. Whoopi nods slightly. Exactly. That's why I'm not backing off it. Reese gives a small smile, but her tone is steady. And I'm not asking you to. That line lands quietly, not loud but strong. The audience reacts with a soft murmur. The co-host on the far end tries to reframe things. Maybe we can look at this from another angle. Reese, when you hear criticism like this, does it change how you approach your work? Reese turns slightly toward her, but you can tell she's still very aware of Whoopi sitting right there. I think it's important to listen. I really do. But I also think you have to be careful not to let every outside opinion reshape what you're doing, or you lose your direction. Whoopi leans in again immediately. But isn't that part of the responsibility? To evolve based on what people are saying. Reese nods. Yes, but there's a difference between evolving and constantly defending your right to exist in a space. The audience reacts, louder this time. A few claps, a couple of om-hom sounds. Whoopi raises her eyebrows slightly. No one's questioning your right to exist in a space. Reese responds quickly. Not directly. But when the conversation keeps circling around whether what you're doing is real enough or deep enough, that's what it starts to feel like. There's a ripple through the audience. That line connects. One of the hosts nods slowly. I can see that. But Whoopi doesn't soften. Or it could just be accountability. Reese turns toward her again, more direct now. Accountability is important. I'm not arguing that. But accountability should also be informed. That word, informed, hangs there for a second. Whoopi tilts her head. You think I'm not informed? The audience reacts instantly, louder, sharper. Reese shakes her head quickly, but she doesn't back away. That's not what I said. Whoopi doesn't blink. It sounded like it. Now the tension spikes. This is the sharpest it's been. One of the co-hosts immediately jumps in, hands slightly raised. Okay, let's just slow that down for a second, another host adds. Yeah, I think we're getting into wording here. But Reese speaks again, more carefully this time, choosing each word. What I mean is, when you're looking at something from the outside, you don't always have the full context. That's true for anyone. Whoopi leans back slightly, but her gaze stays locked. That's fair. But when you present something publicly, you're inviting people to respond based on what they can see. Reese nods. Yes, but that response should leave room for complexity. Whoopi answers immediately. And I think sometimes that complexity gets lost in the way things are presented. The back-and-forth rhythm is faster now. There's less hesitation between responses. One of the hosts tries to step in again, smiling but clearly tense. You both are making strong points. But Reese continues, not raising her voice, just more firm. I just don't think it's fair to reduce years of work into a single narrative. Whoopi responds just as quickly. And I don't think it's fair to expect people not to question that narrative. The audience reacts again, louder, more divided. A few claps on one side, a few on the other. You can see some people leaning forward in their seats now, fully engaged. Another host laughs nervously. This is definitely not the light segment we started with. That gets a bit of laughter, but it fades quickly. Reese glances briefly at the audience, then back to Whoopi. I'm not asking people not to question anything. I'm asking for a more balanced conversation. Whoopi nods slightly. And I'm saying the conversation is already balanced. You just don't like the side you're hearing. That line hits hard. The audience reacts, a louder "oh," followed by scattered clapping. Reese pauses. This is the longest pause she's taken so far. You can see her processing that one. Then she leans forward, her tone still controlled but noticeably sharper. That's not true. Whoopi raises an eyebrow. Then what is it? Reese answers directly. I don't mind criticism. What I mind is when it's framed in a way that assumes intent without understanding. There's a strong wave of applause. One of the co-hosts nods quickly. That's a fair distinction. But Whoopi shakes her head slightly. Intent doesn't erase impact. Another reaction from the audience, louder, more intense. Reese responds immediately. And impact isn't always negative just because it's questioned. Now they're almost speaking in quick turns, no long pauses anymore. Whoopi. But it can be. Reese. And it can also be positive. Whoopi. But you don't always get to decide that. Reese, neither do you. That line lands sharply. The audience reacts, a mix of gasps, claps, and nervous laughter. One of the hosts leans back, eyes wide. Okay. Another host puts a hand lightly on the table. All right, let's. But the moment has already shifted again. Whoopi gives a small nod, not offended, but clearly engaged. You're right. I don't. But I can question it. Reese nods back. And I can respond to it. There's a brief pause, but it's not a calm one. It's charged. The co-host closest to them jumps in quickly. And that's what we're seeing right now, a real conversation. She looks toward the audience. This is what people want, honesty. The audience claps, some louder than before. But even that doesn't fully break the tension. Reese leans back slightly for the first time in a while, exhaling. I think what's getting lost here is that we're actually on the same side in a lot of ways. Whoopi tilts her head. Maybe. But we're talking about how that side is represented. Reese nods slowly. And I'm saying it's being represented through real effort, not just messaging. Whoopi replies calmly. And I'm saying the messaging still matters. There's a pause again. This time, one of the producers off camera can be faintly heard cueing something. Not loud, but enough that the hosts notice. One of them glances off stage briefly, then back. We're almost at break. There's a slight shift in energy, that awareness that time is running. But instead of slowing down, it almost makes everything feel more urgent. Whoopi turns back to Reese. Let me ask you one thing, and then we can breathe for a second. Reese nods. Okay. Whoopi's tone is steady, but pointed. Do you think there's ever a point where the brand becomes bigger than the message? That question lands heavier than anything before it. The audience goes quiet. Completely quiet. Reese doesn't answer right away. She looks down briefly, then back up. And when she speaks, her tone is calm, but there's a clear edge now. Only if you let it. A beat. Then she adds more firmly. And I haven't. The audience reacts, loud applause, mixed with a few surprised sounds. One of the hosts quickly jumps in, almost relieved to have an opening. All right, we are going to take a quick break. Another adds. But this conversation is not over. The audience claps louder now, the tension turning into energy. As the cameras begin to pull back slightly and the music starts to come in, you can still see Reese and Whoopi looking at each other. Not smiling, not angry, just locked in that same focused, unfiltered exchange. And it's clear to everyone watching. The break isn't going to cool this down. If anything, it's about to come back even stronger. The music fades out as they come back from break, and you can feel it immediately. The energy hasn't dropped at all. If anything, it's tighter now. The audience is already clapping, louder than before, like they know they're walking back into something unfinished. One of the hosts smiles toward the camera, a little more composed than she was before the break. Welcome back. So we're in the middle of a conversation that clearly struck a nerve, in a good way. A few people in the audience laugh and clap. Another host adds, and we're going to continue it, because I think there's something important here. Whoopi nods slightly, hands folded on the table now. Reese sits upright, composed again, but there's still that focus in her expression, like she hasn't mentally left the conversation for even a second. The host turns to Reese first. Before the break, you said you haven't let the brand become bigger than the message. Can you explain what that looks like in practice? Reese nods, taking a small breath. It means the decisions we make, the projects we choose, the people we hire, the stories we tell, those come from a real place. Not just what's going to look good or perform well, but what actually adds something. Whoopi listens without interrupting this time, but her expression is still thoughtful, still questioning. Reese continues, more calmly now. And I think sometimes, when something grows, people assume it must have lost that original intention. But growth doesn't automatically mean compromise. The audience claps, steady, supportive. Whoopi leans in slightly. But it can. Reese nods. Yes, it can. I agree with that. But I think you have to look at each case individually, not assume it across the board. There's a small pause, less tense than before, but still very engaged. One of the co-hosts jumps in, clearly trying to bridge the gap. I think what's interesting here is that both of you are talking about responsibility, just from different angles. She looks at Whoopi. You're saying there's a responsibility to be transparent and real. Then to Reese. And you're saying there's a responsibility to stay true to your intention. Both of them nod slightly. For the first time, there's a moment that feels almost aligned. But it doesn't stay there for long. Whoopi turns back to Reese. Let me ask you this. Do you ever worry that the way things are presented might unintentionally exclude people who don't see themselves in that version of empowerment? That question shifts. The tone again, not as sharp as before, but still pointed. Reese answers more slowly this time. I think about inclusion a lot. It's actually something we talk about constantly. But I also think no single platform can represent every experience perfectly. Whoopi nods. That's true. Reese continues. What we can do is expand the conversation over time, bring in more voices, create more opportunities. That's where the real change happens. The audience claps again, strong, supportive. One of the hosts smiles. That's a good note. But Whoopi adds quietly, as long as it keeps expanding. Reese looks at her and nods. It will. There's a pause, and this one feels different. Not tense, not sharp. Just settled, but still meaningful. Another host laughs lightly. Okay, I feel like we all just went through something together. The audience laughs, louder now, the tension finally easing a bit. But then the same host turns toward the camera. And clearly, people are going to have a lot to say about this. That line gets knowing laughter and claps. The conversation shifts slightly now, not away from the topic, but into reflection. One host says, "This is what live TV is supposed to be. Real conversations, even when they're uncomfortable." Whoopi nods. Exactly. It's not about agreeing all the time. Reese adds, it's about being willing to have the conversation in the first place. That gets a strong round of applause. You can feel the tone changing, still serious, but no longer confrontational. The host on the end glances down briefly, likely at a monitor or notes, then looks back up. I'm already seeing reactions coming in. She smiles. People are very engaged. Another host laughs. That's one way to put it. The first host continues. Some people are saying this is exactly the kind of discussion they want to see, honest, direct. Others are saying it got a little too heated. The audience reacts with a mix of laughter and clapping. Whoopi shrugs slightly. That's going to happen. Reese smiles, a more relaxed smile now. That means people care. The host nods. And that's the takeaway, right? There's a brief pause, and then she adds, because after the show, this doesn't just stop here. She gestures slightly. It continues online, in conversations, in how people think about these issues. The audience claps again, steady, thoughtful. Another host leans forward. And let's be real, this clip is going to be everywhere. That gets a bigger laugh from the audience. Whoopi smiles slightly. That's part of the job. Reese nods. It is. The tone now feels almost reflective, like both sides have said what they needed to say. But there's still one last layer to it. The main host turns to both of them. If there's one thing each of you would want people watching at home to take away from this conversation, what would it be? Whoopi answers first. Ask questions. Don't just accept things at face value, no matter who it is. A strong round of applause. Reese nods, then adds, and also, don't assume you know everything about something from the outside. There's always more going on than what you see. Another wave of applause, just as strong. The host smiles. I think that's a fair balance. There's a final pause, a calm one this time. Then she turns toward the camera again. All right, that's all the time we have for today. The audience begins clapping, louder now, more unified. But before the music fully comes up, the host adds one more line, smiling slightly. And we have a feeling this conversation is far from over. That gets one last big reaction. As the show wraps, you can see Reese and Whoopi exchange a brief look. Not tense anymore, but still serious. A small nod between them. Not agreement, not disagreement, just acknowledgement. The camera pulls back, the applause continues, and the segment ends. But off-air, the story keeps going. Clips from the conversation start circulating almost immediately. Short moments, the sharp exchanges, the overlapping lines, the quieter but heavier responses. All of it starts appearing across social media within minutes. Some viewers are firmly on Reese's side, praising her for staying composed and standing her ground. Others support Whoopi, saying she asked the questions people were already thinking. Hashtags start trending. Debates spark in comment sections. Reaction videos begin popping up within hours. Even media outlets pick it up, framing it as a rare, unscripted moment of real tension on daytime TV. The kind that doesn't happen often anymore. Behind the scenes, sources say the conversation continued briefly after the cameras stopped rolling. Calmer, more private, but still honest. No shouting, no drama, just two strong personalities finishing a conversation that started on air. And that becomes part of the story too. Because what people take away from it isn't just the disagreement. It's the fact that neither side walked away from it. They stayed. They responded. They engaged. And in today's media landscape, that alone stands out. The clip continues to gain views, discussions keep growing, and the moment becomes one of those talk show segments people keep coming back to. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt real. Now we want to hear from you. Whose side were you on in this debate? Do you agree with Reese, or do you think Whoopi made the stronger points? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.